Hello, my name is Sam Hearn. I'm here with Patrick Jones and Tucker Lieberman,
Hello.
who are two writers that we've been honored to sit down with to speak with. We're going to be focusing on a bit of Tucker's work for book, bad, or not book, memoir,
Yeah.
Bad Fire, and some of Patrick's work, if he shares some of it with us today as well. So, Tucker and I were just talking a bit about the process of how personal writing can be to your initial story. And Patrick, I'd like to know what you have to say about that with Tucker's book as well. Just the context of being a writer and writing so personally. Is there times that you find that difficult, or you excel at that, or?
Yeah, that's a great question, and my initial reaction to it is very visceral in that I'm commenting on the writing of another man who's experienced something that I never have and who has drafted it into a unfiltered and direct memoir that's public. So that's something that I've even like that project is something that I haven't experienced, let alone the story that project portrays. And so I can only imagine on the influence that had on your feeling of like what's private versus what's not, and choosing to portray it to the world and to like the public sphere.
Absolutely. Do you want to touch on that? Was your intention always to make this piece so public, or did you ever, while writing this, was your intention to put it out, or was this a writing for more of yourself? Because it seems, if I had written this, I probably wouldn't have put it out to the world, to be honest with you.
Yeah, when I had the experience, I wasn't sure at all what I was going to share with anyone ever.
Sure.
In part because the nature of the experience was a questioning of reality. Later, as I started to explore the feelings and ideas I was having, I was transcribing it as fiction. So I was trying to, invent a fictional name for a character who was essentially me, who was processing some of these ideas. And I wasn't sure if I was ever going to share even the fictionalized version.
Mm-hmm.
And it was several years before I decided that I was able to distill some of it and put some of it out as a memoir. The book itself is very short. It's about 30 pages. So clearly I have many ideas about my own life, as everyone has about their own life. And I could have written many more than 30 pages, but the 30-page version is the version I want to share.
Okay, absolutely. I like the way you put that. Pat, I want to ask you a bit as well. The biggest thing I took from your book was and I don't know if you made it be a constant theme, but the term of intention throughout the entire time. And intentions of good can lead to bad, and intentions of bad can lead to good. I know that a lot of my life as well, in terms of mental health, is defined by my intentions. Things can go very poorly, but if I know my intentions were good in the beginning, then I'm okay with that, and I can move on no matter the result. But I want to know a bit about the intention of writing. Do you do this for both of you? Do you write? What is the purpose of self? Is it just for self-reflection? Is it for exploration? Is it what gets you to sit down and actually break these things down?
Okay. I can take it first if you want me to.
Go
Sure.
for it.
Yeah, when I started out this memoir, I began by talking about a journal I'd kept when I was 18. in which I was trying to discuss big questions about the meaning of life and what my purpose was. So that was an early attempt to identify purpose and to articulate a purpose. But that's often very hard to do, and we have often intentions to write something down that is very clear. And when we begin the process, we realize, oh, we aren't very clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to write down the meaning of life or what I want to do with my life or what I ought to be doing with my life reveals how complicated intentions are. And even if we have good intentions, well, good intentions aren't enough. We need to put them into action. We need to know how to put them into action.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to be actions that actually help the world and help ourselves and help others, because sometimes we're well-intentioned, but we accidentally hurt others.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, intention is a very complex topic, and I think that ends up having a lot to do with our health, because we are beings of intention and action, and when there's some disconnect between what we want to do and what we're able to do and what we are doing day to day, it often becomes disturbing. And I think that's where a lot of the dissonance comes from in our daily lives and our sense of self and our mental health, ultimately.
Sure. The question is about purpose and intention,
Mm-hmm.
and what really brings us to the state of mind where writing becomes possible. And I think to me, writing is primarily a means for me to escape my stutter and exist in a space where I'm on like equal ground to everyone else. And in the context of intention and in the context of how we kind of interact with the people and world around us, for better or worse, I think the moments that I'm most sensitive to are moments of like conversational interaction, like moments as small as ordering coffee to as large as opening up to somebody and being vulnerable and being brave enough to enter that zone. And when I write, it allows me to express my more true personality that's exempt from all of that, like almost like television static scrambling for words that I can actually pronounce. And then my vocabulary just becomes so much wider because I don't have to worry about what I can say versus what I can't. And I'm trying to connect it to intention, and I'm having trouble.
No, good. I love what you're saying, though, Pat.
Yeah, and so that's what I got so far. I'm sorry I can't bring it all the way home.
Going off that, though, boy, I just lost my thought, though. Okay. When you say that, Patrick, it makes me think of what Tucker and I were talking about before. The fact that writing can be so personal, and that words that you put down are the choice of not only logic but of expression. And so we were talking a bit about the editing process and having someone go through and change your words in such an emotional writing process, in such a like you said, a visceral writing process. It's so personal. My writing between the two of you is not talented, and I've had extraordinary difficulty putting words when it comes to my story on a page. I found it very easy in college and high school to write a paper when I just needed to get a point across. But deciding what is the point of my story is something really challenging and really remarkable that the two of you are able to do. Do you want to continue our conversation a bit about the editing process of, like, when you were talking about how this journal is a broad spectrum of your journals pieced together into a bit of your story, let's say. But there were parts that came to needing different wording or different, I guess, language. Let's just say that. What's it like to have a piece of writing that's so you, but at the same time having to fight for every inch of your words, you know?
Yeah, it is work.
Mm-hmm.
Writing is definitely work. It's art, and there's a lot of effort that goes into art. I have no problem putting sentences down on a page. I can free write forever, and I can end up with hundreds of pages easily. Those sentences will not be publishable, 99% of them. They've got to be rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, and I've got to ask someone else's opinion, and they're going to tell me, okay, this section is not relevant. In fact, most of the sections are not relevant. Here's the 1/3 that sounds like it's the core of what you're trying to get at. So then I got to cut down to that 1/3 and expand from there and show it to a different person who's never seen it before. And that person will say, oh, now I see a different 1/3 that is really the core of what you're trying to say. And then I expand from there. And then we get to the point of where we start with line edits, and people will start criticizing on the level of each word. You know, do you really need the sentence? There's something that's a little bit off here in what you're trying to communicate. So the editing process takes probably longer than just getting the initial words down on paper. And sometimes it's a little painful if enough life experience went into the point I'm trying to communicate. And then if I feel like I'm putting a lot of myself and my artistry into choosing a certain phrasing, and then when I realize, oh, this section is not relevant at all, after all the hours I put into coming up with this insight doesn't actually belong in this essay. You know, there's pain in letting go of that. But it's pain that's worth going through, because the editing process itself generates new insights. I'd say the intention is what gets me to sit with my butt in the chair writing something. And then whatever initial insights and initial intentions I have, I'm going to come up with new intentions and insights. Just going through the process of saying, well, really, what is of value here and what am I trying to do?
Right.
The finished product is something totally different.
And it sounds a lot like, through the conversations that you're having with these editors, your, like, the intention of the story that you're telling is slightly like adapted to the audience of whoever that person is. And that might sound differently than what you originally wrote. And I wanted to ask, is the audience that you most often find yourself writing to when you produce that initial draft, is that audience your own self, or is there a particular person or people who you feel like you're writing to, or just no one at all?
That is a good question. The initial draft.
Right. Like before anyone else gets a chance to see it.
I think with this particular memoir that was about a brief mental illness that I had, I was waiting several years before I sat down to write this memoir, because at first I wasn't sure I wanted to share it with anyone. And then I had, the fictionalized version that I thought maybe I'll show to someone, but it's going to be secret. And when I finally made the decision that I was willing to share some of it, this piece, I did have in mind that I was going to publish it and make it generally available to anyone who wanted to buy the book. So I did have my audience in mind. The audience generally was anyone who might pick it up on a bookshelf and want to read it. And I was writing to that person who might be a stranger. Mm-hmm. And I was framing things in a certain way. I wanted to tell a story that could be informative to someone I didn't know, someone of any gender, any age, any life experience. I wanted to communicate an idea and make it somewhat universal. That storytelling goal that we have so often, which is to take something particular and make it universal, or take a universal and make it specific. Merge these things together. Like, you're telling a specific story, but you want people to learn something about human nature and find something in it that can somehow apply to their life, that they can relate to on some level. So that was really my goal, and I did, from the beginning of writing this particular book, have the idea that I just wanted it to be public.
Patrick, I want to ask you, because we've been talking about the editing process, and we now live in a world where writing has come, like, I never thought that taking typing class in middle school would be so important in life. In the process of writing a book and going through the editing process, and speech writing almost feels a little bit more like posting things on the internet. I know a lot of your work goes up online, Pat. Do you think that there's what are the upsides and the downsides to being able to just put out your piece of writing without anybody's say?
It's really empowering, and I don't exactly know what the reward is, because I'm not being paid or anything. The only people who see it are people I know, so there's not a whole lot of, or at least I believe that there's not a whole lot of ego that is produced through it, but it's empowering to own the entire process and have mm-hmm. no one else provide any input through it until people want to comment on a product, where the comments won't influence the end result. And I think a lot of what I write is about moments that I've had with people. And I think that they're often fictionalized and changed in terms of the drama of what happens, but oftentimes a small part of me will write those stories or poems as like a small tribute to the friend whom they're about. But I believe that they're also universal enough where a lot of people have had experiences like the ones that I've had and can kind of romanticize their interpretation of them however they please.
In both of your works, I find a lot of universal truths, a lot of things like you're talking about, Pat, that's just so identifiable. But I think that comes with writing that's very honest. If it seems untrue in any way, that kind of gets tainted. But when you write something so personal, especially about an experience, like you guys are talking about, a specific experience, the reader is able to put them in both of your shoes. Like, I can't imagine being in either of your places, but the only way I've seen to this point to make it a more in personal experience for me, like I take over your minds when I read your work, and that's a very interesting escape reality. I want to know what you guys think of. We've been talking about intentions a lot so far, but I think there's a large part of our world today is the conflict between intention and interpretation. We have a lot of well-meaning people and some not meaning well-meaning people, but like we were saying earlier, the interpretation or the intention, excuse me, is only that first step, and how someone receives the information is almost as important as what the intention behind that was in the first place.
Right. That's very true.
Um,
Did you want to speak to that, Pat?
I was just gonna react and say that religion comes to mind.
and that was a focus, or not necessarily a large focus, but you had biblical ties throughout your entire piece.
Right. Use that imagery.
Yes, absolutely. And it seemed to work very well. Why did you make that choice?
Part of it was that I was looking for the imagery of fire, and I was looking for the honest origin of why I had certain images of fire during this brief mental illness. And some of it really may have come from biblical imagery that I had been exposed to in childhood and throughout my adult life in one way or another. And biblical stories that I have absorbed in some way. I'm not theistic, but I'm aware of biblical stories and culture, so that may be a lens through which I interpret certain ideas, feelings, questions about the world. So it wasn't exactly a choice that was purely aesthetic. It was almost more factual, I want to say. Like it was a question of fact I was investigating. Where do these images of fire come from? Why are they recurring to me? What do they mean in my life? And the factual answer to that may be, well, they came from my exposure to biblical stories. But there is also, an aesthetic question, or more of a literary question of, well, how much do I really want to rely on biblical imagery when I tell my own story? Because if I overdo it, people may think I'm religious, or they may get some different impression from the memoir. If I underdo it, then maybe I'm not telling the full story that I want to communicate, or then I have to find different imagery to use throughout my memoir. There is that issue of interpretation, because there's my intention of, I'm trying to tell a story, I'm trying to use imagery that people can relate to, that people understand, that they recognize, because maybe they were exposed to biblical stories too. But understanding anyone can pick up the book, and they may be biblically literate, so they may recognize the imagery. They may not have been exposed to Bible stories, and they're going to need me to explain a little bit more for them. And if I don't get that balance just right, they're going to interpret it in whatever way they're going to interpret it. And they're going to apply it to themselves and their lives and their questions about life and the nature of everything, however they're going to do that. I want to control it a little bit because I'm the person telling the story, but I also need to let go of control in the end and understand the reader's going to interpret it the way they want to interpret
it. Another focus throughout your entire piece, that it was not just a biblical metaphor, but you kept referring to metaphor as itself, of how difficult it is to have a metaphor stay together for an extended amount of time before it just kind of falls in with on itself. And I find that metaphor is an exceptional tool in writing, but I feel like in emotional ties, and especially when you're talking about mental health, these metaphors that we try to use often fall apart earlier than we expect. Pat, I know some of your writing has been I don't even know how to say it. So how would you explain your writing, Pat? Let me ask that.
Great question. I don't even know how to answer that.
Yeah.
So I primarily write through the mediums of either like quick, terse poems that just present the facts of a story as colorfully as I can. And then I also have written um, 3 short stories that are harder for me to construct because I'm kind of learning them as I'm creating them. So I don't really, I'm still working on educating myself in that. But if I were to describe to somebody who's read none of my writing, I would tell them that I try to write with color and I try to highlight the beautiful moments of life that we all experience, and I hope that it helps people add preciousness to their own moments of emotion of all sorts of extremes that they can kind of cherish a bit more. And that's how I would explain it.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I was honestly lost for words about it.
That's beautiful.
Thanks. Right.
I want to talk to you guys a bit about the mental health aspect of not just mental health necessarily, but mental. We are a mental health organization, but more than anything, I try to focus on the fact that we are all stuck within our own brains. Everybody has a story. Everyone, whether you have a mental illness or not, you deal with stress. You deal with the fact that you are a person alive with the mind thinking constantly. And I want to know how much of your writing process for both of you is logical writing. Like you said, you do a lot of free writing, which sounds very therapeutic to me, of just being able to not think and put it out there. I know that a lot of my tools for mental health when I get really stressed is try to notice the emotion, reflect on it, not judge myself, and move on. But being able to, like, I have a couple pieces of writing in my life that I'll forever cherish because I was smart enough back then to go and sit down and just write the free write of the day I lost my friend Daniel, or a letter to his mother. Things I'll probably never share with anybody, but I'm able to capture the emotion of what I was feeling at one point of time. I'd like to know from, I guess, focus on you, Tucker, why trying to think of a poignant way to ask you this. Well, I don't want to ask just like how do you do it kind of thing, but like that's really what I'm thinking. It's how does somebody uh, I'm genuinely scared to be in the position you are writing about internally. Was there any sort of a struggle or like it seems like I'm still behind some sort of a barrier that keeps me from being able to do that. So I don't want to say effortlessly because I know it's not effortlessly at all. It takes a lot of effort, but effectively. What do you think? Is it just practice? What allows someone to go so internally to find their voice?
Yeah, it is a lot of practice. A lot of writing that I do has never been shared just because it's unfinished. It's in some file, it's in some notebook, it's scribbled down, it never got developed into a finished product. So that's all practice. There is intention that goes behind getting in a position to finish something. I have to know roughly who it's for, where it might be published, how long it's going to be, what it's going to say, because that's what allows me to finish it. Otherwise, it'll just end up as scribblings that aren't necessarily related to each other.
I agree completely. That's where I'm at. I'm stuck with a story with no real goal in mind. And I find it interesting that you are able to, and it's probably helpful that you're able to focus your story to the short time where you had this mental illness and get through the story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, rather than I feel like we're all trying to tell our own stories and we don't know where they're going.
That's true, because our lives are long and we do a lot within our lives. And there's so many ways to tell a memoir. You can tell it chronologically. You can begin with something that happened on Monday, and Tuesday's the middle, and Wednesday's the end. But you might want to start it much earlier in your life to give it context of who you are and how you got to be the way you are. You might want to extrapolate into the future, like what this might mean for the rest of your life. You might not want to tell it chronologically. You might need to reverse some things and tell it a little creatively. Yeah, and you don't necessarily know when you first sit down. So there's a willingness to try and see what works, and also to ask for feedback, and to go through the pain and the effort of rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, I think.
So what's that? I want to ask you a bit about that process. I don't know how you get some response to your work as well online, Patrick, but I've never shown a piece of work to anyone that I don't have a personal relationship with other than a teacher to get feedback. And especially like an editor, what's it like to show someone who's a third party rather than your partner in life or a friend or but someone clinical?
Do you have experience with that, Pat?
No, but I just had a thought. So I think that something that is personal and important to me is my intimacy with people close to me, and my like emotional like intake of how a person who I care about who is experiencing an event is, and how they are processing through an event, and how I can help them, and what exactly they might need. And that goes with me outwards towards a friend as well. And I am actually inquiring to speak to a psychiatrist in Portland, because I believe that a clinical opinion and a person who's more removed and has a more clear kind of intention towards me, in contrast to the intention of a friend just to care and just to provide, care, time, and love. And there's really no like clear end to that. There's no clear middle. It's just that person is just a friend in my world who I don't have like a plan like about their trajectory through my life or anything compared to a clinical perspective where they're more impartial, they're more objective, and I think that gives them license to be kind of harsher and to be a bit more like hardly critical without really having to deal with the personal consequences of it, because like I can imagine, and Tucker, please feel free to correct me, but these people kind of like check in and then check out after the process is completed, and I don't really imagine that I would necessarily maintain like a personal relationship with them afterwards. Is that
I agree.
true? Okay.
Yeah, and that's where money can be useful. It doesn't have to be a large amount of money, but whatever they're willing to accept as their professional rate, or even a nominal rate, it keeps some distance between you and the editor. And it doesn't have to be someone you know. It can just be someone you found in a listing somewhere, and you reach out and say, hey, I heard you do editing. Can you help me out with a piece? And you give them some money, and they give you back the feedback, and that's the end of the transaction, and you don't have to have a relationship again with them after that. That sort of neutrality can actually be really helpful.
Yeah.
I find that parallel between writing and speech therapy to be incredibly interesting, though, and very honest, because I know therapy I use is, I like a therapist that's very conversational. It's a back and forth conversation rather than just me telling them all about my life. They're talking about aspects of theirs where they see similarities and differences and tools. A lot of this in this whole organization is about giving people tools. And I think writing, especially about emotion and emotional times, is a very powerful tool. Do you guys, like, I've actually written something for a therapist once to go and do that kind of a thing. Like, before I gave a speech at school about my friend's loss, I showed it to a therapist and we went through it. And as well, I found interesting the conversation now of the importance of language surrounding mental health and suicide, and especially whether it's, we no longer say committed suicide, we say took their life or something like that. It's not committing a crime. But the back to intention, interpretation of the words we use, it can be an opportunity for insight and personal insight, like you said, but also just I try everything I can when I'm having bad days, whether it be push-ups and jumping jacks or run around the block. I'm going to throw writing into my bag of tools to avoid stresses and to reflect on myself and gain insight. Is there anything else you guys use? Obviously, probably writing, but any other helpful tools you have found in life that keeps you on track, keeps you happy?
Coping strategies in general.
Yeah.
I have mine. You want to go, Pat?
You go.
I would say exercise.
Yeah.
I love being outdoors, walking, running. And I've learned reaching out to people is also an art, because connecting with friends can be a really valuable tool, and it can also tend to reinforce sometimes bad feelings. You know, if you get into the habit of venting to a friend and maybe they also vent back at you, it can just become a negative habit where you're venting a lot and not necessarily solving your problem. So I've learned, you know, it's really healthy to connect with friends, and I pay attention to the way in which I'm communicating and the topics I choose to share with my friends, with whoever's listening, because if someone's willing to spend time with me and listen to me, that's a precious gift. I mean, that's amazing if you get an hour to sit down with someone. So I think a lot about how I make the best use of that hour, what I'm going to talk about with them, and what I can say that lifts both of us up in the end.
Great point, great skill, and I think that's a skill that I don't have yet, where I don't really have much of a I don't want to use the word agenda, because I think that that's not the greatest word, but I think that I have been embracing with my friends lately a lack of planning and just kind of coexisting through life, kind of wherever the wind takes us. And I feel like there's a responsibility to balance that with like what's actually going to create a positive experience for the two of us, and like, am I wasting a person's time and just complaining, or speaking towards negativity and all that. And I think that as we grow and as time progresses, one of the most significant changes in how we experience it is who we experience it with. And I think that people who surround us may change. And I think that the kind of losing what I'm trying to say here, but I think there's a responsibility to create positive experiences kind of on purpose, rather than just trusting that they'll happen. And yeah, so that's in response to Tucker, and I think in response to the question of kind of how we cope and how we stay kind of in tune with our own brains, is I think that routine helps me a lot, and helps me kind of stay level. And I think lately I haven't been great at it, and I've been noticing that my sleep is off, and my like the time that I wake up can just be like wildly one way or the other. And I think that for me, that irregularity creates some bad experiences. Yeah, it creates unnecessary stress.
Good. All right. I think it's about time for 45 minutes. We should about wrap this up. I want to know if you guys have any closing thoughts or anything to leave us with.
Great question. Let me reflect on it.
You want to go
Tucker,
first, Tucker?
go.
Closing thoughts. I'm connecting where we began when we were talking about intention and interpretation, and then we moved into coping strategies more recently. I think the theme that runs throughout really is communication.
Mm-hmm.
Because writing begins with the intent to communicate something. And how things are interpreted by someone is about receiving that communication and might be part of their coping strategy. And our own coping strategies are partly about how we communicate with the world. Sometimes there's internal communication because there's an internal narrative. Sometimes there's communication with friends, and sometimes it's just, communicating who we are in a more general sense. As we live our lives, we're communicating some parts of ourselves into the world. So writing, I think, is just one tool, one expression of how we do this. And there's a number of other ways we do it, through conversation, through work, through breathing, being still, through choosing to let go. That too was part of my memoir, because I wrote about how we decide what we're going to keep and how much we're going to take in and take really seriously and work through, and how much we have to let go. What we decide to let go of is part of what defines who we are.
Absolutely.
We're defined by saying, I can't have this job, I can't live in this place, I can't be with this person, or this mental illness, the way I'm coping with it now, is not working for me. I have to do something else so that I can cope better, so that I can feel healthier, so that I can move on. So yeah, that too is part of communication, taking a breath, pausing, letting something else in. We can't communicate everything all the time. We can do it in pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And then we let go.
And we try our best.
We do.
Patrick, anything to say?
Yeah. I believe that adding to that is the responsibility of internal communication
Mm-hmm.
and owing ourselves the honesty to realize when something is not working the way we want it to, and having the strength and courage to try to change it.
I want to thank both you guys for not only for sitting down with me, but for your writing as well. I thoroughly enjoy both of your writing, and I'll be sure to keep reading, so keep it coming, and I'll appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for being
Thank
with
you.
us, and thank you, Tucker, so much.
Thank you, Sam.
From Sam Hearn, Patrick Jones, and Tucker Lieberman, you want to show your book a little bit first?
Oh.
You can also get it
Holding
on
a copy of it.
Bad Fire, available on Amazon, right?
It is.
And Patrick, where can we find some of your work?
Instagram right now.
There we go. All right, and I'll have those links at the bottom as well. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Bye.
Bye.